Welcome everyone to Almost Cancelled. I am Peter, and today I am going to be talking about The Handmaid's Tale, Season 4, Episode 4. It's called Milk. So full spoilers for the episode as always, and I was very curious to see how they would continue from the cliffhanger from last episode, which was, of course, June and Janine fleeing and getting away whilst the others died. And of course it ends up in a trip and a big pool of milk on a train, which is not where the entire episode is set with those two characters, but it's a significant amount. It's a significant amount of milk. The title makes a lot of sense. And of course, there's the other sort of connotations you can take from milk. The topic of being a mother, of course, is very relevant. In the show in general, but this episode we have not only Janine's flashbacks to getting an abortion, but also even just the idea of Serena Joy's new pregnancy. We've got a lot of, and so milk, naturally kind of ties into the themes of all those things a little bit. So, where to begin? There's some very interesting confrontations in this episode. I think Serena Joy has Serena Joy has one with Rita, and Rita then has another one with Waterford. But June also has one with Janine, where there's kind of a clash. It's once they're actually in the tank and once they're on the train and they've snuck in, they've drained the milk, and tensions are high. They're trying to keep warm because they're freezing, because obviously this is a cold container for milk. And they end up fighting, and Janine effectively tries to guilt trip when she asks if June told them where the handmaids were. And that's actually caught me off guard a little bit, because I just kind of assumed that they accepted that she probably did eventually tell them where they were, and it was just understood that in the context of Gilead that there would be a point where everyone's going to break, and even June was going to break at some point. I don't know if I needed this to be like a dramatic beat necessarily, but it worked coming from Janine, because Janine's so, off kilter versus most characters. She has this sort of childlike kind of mentality at times, and I think the way she reacts to certain information here, I think works in the context of what the show is doing with it. And likewise, I think it feels especially cruel coming from June when she says something like, I should have left you behind a long time ago, or something to that effect. So clearly tensions are high between these two characters, and it's one of these things where you get the sense that they're going to regret some of the things they're saying here, that obviously they've just lost a lot of friends. Janine brings up Alma saying we can't leave without June. Just statements like that are kind of bubbling over, and we get to this point with both of them where the train is attacked by someone who is armed, by a team of armed people. It might be Mayday, it may be whoever. It turns out not to be, of course, but we have the obvious tension of coming out and seeing who it is, and it seems to be a group of raiders, to use post-apocalyptic terminology. They are a group who basically just survive off of stealing from Gilead trains and transport routes. They're limited on supplies, food, and things like that. But they're not Mayday. They don't have a purpose or a cause. And there was kind of a mix of reactions to some of this stuff where they're going through their base once they've agreed to come with them, and so the main guy is kind of like the only one they're really talking to, and they're getting glances from people because of their outfits, because they're in handmade outfits. And when they get up to this guy's office, he says something to the effect, "I can't believe it, sex slaves in America." And June responds with, "It wasn't America," and it's kind of that. There's a moment in this scene where it takes a bit of a dark turn, and it's kind of this thing where, okay, it's not Mayday, he's just kind of a rebel, like I say, a raider, effectively. And he's like, "Look, nothing's free here. I'm not just going to give you food and shelter. We're not like some charity. We're not this, we're not that." And June says, "Look, we can be useful. We can do things. Let's do this." And the guy takes this really dark turn where he then sort of says that one of them's going to stay with him and offer their sex services effectively. He doesn't say it out loud like that, but it's very clear what he's meaning. And to credit to the show where it's true, because there was elements of this that I was ready to be a little against, in the sense that I thought, oh god, even this guy who's not part of Gilead is just awful. And particularly, and this is where I want to give it a little bit of credit, is that he has maybe one of the most sickening lines that I think this show has had in a while that really made my blood boil a little bit. Is when June has agreed to stay back because she doesn't want to put Janine through this. That the idea that to get a place to sleep, to get some clothes and food, one of them has to have sex with this guy or give him head, whatever. And June stays back, and she's sort of seems to be willing to make this sacrifice, and she's sort of shaking, her hands shaking, and part of me was thinking during this particular moment, I was like, sometimes people accuse this show of being misery porn, and it kind of feels like we're finding a way to put her in this horrible situation, kind of thing. Ultimately, I don't feel that badly about it, because one, the dramatic point that's made by the end with Janine, which I'll get to in a minute, but the line he has here where he says, "I'm not going to force you to do it. You're free to leave at any point," really made my skin crawl, because okay, you're not holding a gun to her head, but this isn't really much of a choice. They need to have somewhere to hide. They need food. These are basic necessities. You can say you're not forcing her, but you really are. You're giving her an impossible choice where, in order to not do this, she's going to have to accept an extremely difficult and life-threatening scenario, effectively, where she might not be able to get to better shelter. She may not be able to get to a food source. She might not. It was very cynical, and it kind of played into this, because this scene more or less starts with him being disgusted that there's sex slaves in the US, but then says, all you've got to trade, all you've got of value for me is sex. That's what he responds with. And him saying that he's given her the choice, he's given her the illusion of choice. And she does, ultimately she can't do it. She gets up and she leaves. Which was good. I thought that was a good moment, because it was like, okay, she thought she was making the choice to go through with this, but there's still too much trauma from all the crap she's been through. This is still so dehumanizing, and all of the stuff that comes with that it made a lot of good sense for me, much like the end of last episode, where we're just not going to be handmaids again. We can't. We're past that point. We'd rather die fighting than go back to being that. And similar here, even though the situation's slightly different and there's kind of a choice in the sleaziest possible way, this was the Weinstein choice. Not to drag this down, but this was you do this, you get no career. Which, it's a choice, technically, in the coldest possible terms, but it's coercion, it's all these things. But she can't do it. She can't go through with it. And so this sort of sad reality, and the sort of the guilt for June, when Janine ultimately does this instead, and we don't see it. We see Janine looking back at the door, like, briefly, but we don't actually get the scene of her getting in and talking to him or anything like that. We just have her come over to June at the end and offer her half of her food, and it has a line to the effect of, "It wasn't that bad. He liked my eye patch." And June sort of, it's this really cold ending to the episode where June says she's sorry. And it's kind of perfect as a bookend to the fight from earlier in the episode, because when June keeps saying, "I'm trying to keep us alive, you're being ungrateful, I should have left you behind," in a really sad way, Janine has just done something. She's just made this sacrifice because she felt like she could do this for June. And maybe in some level she felt like she had to find something to contribute, because she doesn't feel like she does contribute in the same way that June does, because June's the one who's thinking about things. June's the one who's, making sure they have the courage to go on. She's kind of taking care of Janine, all these things. This was a really, and if June has taken kind of a big sister role, as it were, with Janine over the course of this show, it's really kind of, sick and twisted that her quote unquote surrogate little sister has done this so she can have something to eat. it's obviously really dark, and it is very much in that misery porn level of like depression, but it's one that at least advances the characters and kind of makes June recontextualize and sort of reevaluate who Janine is to her, and it doesn't just feel like shock misery as sometimes the show can be guilty of. So I'll give it credit there. I thought that was a good ending. I was particularly impressed with the ending because when it got to the point where he was wanting to be sucked off, I was kind of like, oh, really, are we doing this? But then it did something good with it for the ending, and it kind of like had a narrative point to make. And I guess that's maybe just me still in kind of a place where the show, unless it's, I'm not trusting the show to do the right thing or do the good thing anymore. I mean, I'm kind of, it's put me in a place where I'm kind of expecting it to screw up occasionally, and I'm happy that it's not. Like, I'm always going to be happy that it doesn't. But so the trust isn't completely back, but credit where credit is due. Other plots, of course, we have the Janine flashbacks, which tie in to things. We find out that she got pregnant after having a son and went to get an abortion. The big thing for me with this scene was this horrible first scene, because it's basically just two scenes. I mean, the second one's got a couple of parts to it, but it's basically just two scenes. The first one is her going to what she thinks is an abortion clinic, but it turns out to be this trap, this place that kind of lures in women who want abortions and then tries to hit them with religion and hits them with all these reasons and in scientific dangers of doing so. Something that the actual abortion clinic, the doctor, the later scene says to her, yeah, I'm legally obligated to say, hey, there's a small increase of risk of this, this, and this. But it's like they oversell it a bit, or there's something. I can't remember the exact line, but it was it was this thing where she makes it very clear, like if you're making this choice and no one's coercing you into it, then that doesn't, that's kind of the end of my concern as to why you're doing this. None of it's my business, or why you feel like you can't do this. You don't have to justify to me why you don't want a child. I do think from a larger mythology point of view, I do think that the concept of this, and I have no doubt that places like this probably do exist, sadly, that try to talk women out of having abortions. But in the context of the world that we know existed right before Gilead, which is, the birth rates are plummeting and people are looking for extreme solutions, you get why abortion would become this really, like, even more frowned upon in many circles than it perhaps already is, and why all these eyes would be on abortion clinics and women who get abortions. Like, you feel like that would all be like under so much scrutiny in the world that we get pre-Gilead. So yeah, and I don't think it's a surprise. It's been a long time since obviously the previous seasons. I mean, I think her getting an abortion might be why she became a handmaid. Because a lot of the handmaids had done something. In June's case, it was cheating on her husband. Something that Gilead saw as immoral or whatever. So, the scenes were solid. Infuriating in most of the right ways. So yeah, and it's the idea of Janine like getting the if Janine's remembering these sequences as she's in her head as she's going through the present day story, the idea that she's doing something for the right choice and she's making a conscious choice because it's what's right for the time or whatever it may be. So there's a lot going on there. I think that's all fair to say. The other plot, of course, which is Rita, who I thought this was really well bookended. I thought there was something so relatable to me than Rita's story ending in this episode with getting to order takeout food and just enjoying the fact that she didn't have to make it from scratch. And she gets like all the Japanese food, some sushi or something like that, and she's like just eating it and she's smiling, and it's so different because the episode starts with her making bread, right? And it was something we saw her do in the household a lot. And Moira's there, and she's there to give her a couple of bits of information. Mainly that Serena Joy wants to see her, but she gives her this bread, and they're sharing breakfast or whatever it is, and it still has this kind of downbeat tone where Rita's still adjusting to being free and still adjusting to these things. And this episode sort of puts her through this journey with it. So, like I say, the book ending, of course, is her making the bread and then being kind of miserable eating her probably very nice freshly baked bread. Which there's nothing wrong with making food if you enjoy making food, but she was in a position where that was her like enforced task for years. Whereas now she gets to order some sushi and she's happy. I'm not a big sushi guy. I like other Japanese food. Sushi's not for me. Especially not traditional sushi, which is with the raw fish. But anyway, so she goes to Serena, and Serena hits her with the "I'm pregnant" bombshell, and she's delighted by it. And I felt a little bit sick during this scene because Serena's like, "Oh, it's nice to see a friendly face. It's nice to see a friend. I'm hoping you're going to help me take care of this baby. I want you to be a part of its life." And it's funny because like. But both in this and the Waterford scene afterwards, the Fred scene, I felt like Fred did acknowledge that she's now free. There was a line there about that, but it was kind of odd for both of them how neither one of them really reacted that much to the idea that Rita had also gotten out, that she was involved in the kids getting out of the country, that she was helping June, which she clearly was, given where she ended up and how now she's here. It's funny how many of the main characters from season 1 are now in Canada versus before. It's really funny when you think about it. But and she says she's not going to tell Fred. And Rita actually is kind of receptive to this. She smiles when she sees the the sonogram, and she is smiling at Serena. They're having this moment, and even some of the exchanges, the old Gilead praise be blah 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 exchanges. Even some of those are firing back and forth, and it feels like she's finding a little bit of comfort. I think I related this before to someone who's in prison for a long time and then doesn't know how to live in the outside world, and how there's actually some comforts to some of the things that you became so used to, and became part of your everyday life before. But ultimately, Rita makes this choice to go see Fred to. And it's based on a scene where was it Henry Mark? I always forget this guy's name. The guy who the guy in Canada, yeah, Mark. They always talk to Serena. He comes over with legal papers. It's like basically like a brief on like the defense for Serena, and that Rita is going to be expected to speak in her behalf about how most of the stuff that she did in the house was under duress. That Fred is the big bad who was making her do everything. And we know this is all bullshit. Rita knows this is bullshit. But the big part of this is not just so much that, it's more that all of this moment she shared with Serena was Serena not even like, she may have been intentionally playing her. I mean, that's possible, but I'm not even convinced it's an intentional playing thing. Like, it very well could be. It could be Serena making a conscious choice to warm up to her, to be nice to her, to make her feel like she's a close and valued companion, so that she will want to do all this in court. Although she never mentions the court. That's the thing. Mark even says, "But you're surprised by this. You weren't expecting this." But as this hits her, that part of what this is she wants her to be a voice for her. She wants her to be a witness for her, to speak out against the Commander 8 for her own gains, for Serena's own gains. And this scene is kind of hard hitting for her because ultimately, despite the fact that in the scene itself, Serena was making this feel like, "Oh no, you're part of I want you to be a part of my family. I want us to help raise this kid together. I want you to be involved in the baby's life," so on and so on. But ultimately, she's being used here without even being asked. She's being used here for her own gain, and she feels not like a friend, not like a family member, but as someone who, I mean, as she even says in the scene, she actually said, "Are you aware that in Gilead, I don't know if she used the word owned. Was it owned? It wasn't the word owned, but it was essentially the same meaning. Where, the Waterfords owned her. It was official. There was paperwork that said she belonged to them. And this kind of stark realization she has leads to her going to see Fred. And makes it clear that she's free. which, Fred also kind of tries to, and even he's like, oh, it's nice to see a friendly face, he's happy to see her, under the usual guises, and she tells him about the baby. And just sort of throws this wrench in, and then of course she has her happy ending where she gets to eat her sushi, and all of it's just kind of, it's just this act of defiance of being, no, I am not going to be your puppet, I am not going to be a pawn in your game for either of you. I'm going to throw the wrench into this and let the chaos, because Serena made it very clear she's never going to tell him that he has a child, that he has a son coming. And there you go. So the chaos that is going to ensue from that should be entertaining, if nothing else. I suspect it will be. I will say, I thought this episode had decent balance as well. There was because we had two plots going on. Well, it's not even two plots. One was flashbacks to a character who was in the main plot, but I felt like this Rita plot was a nice significant amount of the episode. This is Serena. I mean Rita. Did I say Rita? Anyway, the Rita plot, the Rita subplot was enough of the episode that the main plot didn't have to rely on things. We could accept that they were in that milk tank for a while and then come back to it and things like that. So not a bad episode. I think there's things to like here. If I have a couple of more points to make, I will say it was kind of interesting seeing the base of operations for this team of raiders, because they have a more traditional looking post-apocalyptic base. We always talk about this show being a dystopian science fiction series, but of course the imagery is very different to most stories with that genre, because it is set in a very specific version of the future. But seeing this war-torn building with parts of the windows and walls missing, everything being very makeshift, it feels more like a traditional, almost post-apocalyptic rather than dystopian. But it was just interesting seeing that actual imagery. And if I want to make one sort of nitpick critique, I guess, is that we get a sort of emotional taking off of the Handmaid clothes from June, where we see it all lying on the floor in a bundle, and all I could think was, we've done this better before. We had this, but I think it was the start of season 2 where she got to take off all of her handmade clothes, and it was kind of a big deal, and it was a really good scene at the time. I kind of felt like we've done this before. That should not be as significant. I mean, I get why it'd be significant as a person, but as a viewer watching a show, we've already seen this. So that moment kind of fell flat. I was just like, we've done this before, so it is what it is. But there you go. That is Handmaid's Tale, season 4, episode 4. Not bad. So we'll see what the next episode brings. So this will be going out tomorrow, which is Saturday. I'm recording this the day before, just to spread out the various content that we've got going out on the TV channel. Because if you weren't aware, the movie podcast, Screams After Midnight and the Atomic Cinema Experiment, they moved to a Male Fuzz Movies channel, so the content's split up a little bit. But clearly, I'm still invested in reviewing the show. For all the worrying that certain episodes gave me, it's kind of funny that we've not seen certain characters again after the first couple of episodes who felt that were going to be more prominent. I'm wondering how and when they'll come back into this. I've actually not been able to speed this up, bizarrely, and get to... I mean, getting caught up for a weekly release is obviously impossible now. It'd be nice to get pretty much caught up for the finale, which I think is 2 weeks away, maybe? People can correct me in the comments, but... because I'm juggling a few shows, it's been kind of difficult, but both of those shows are actually underperforming in terms of YouTube numbers, so it might actually be a case where they get dumped and Handmaid's Tale just gets the full attention span. But people seem to be glad that I'm still doing this. A couple of people asked me when there was a gap between a couple of episodes, if they stopped, they were worried, and I was happy to say no, they've not stopped. But so I should be back with episode 5 soon. Let's try and aim for early in the week. So this is going out Saturday. Let's try and aim for early in the week for episode 5. But there you go. That is my thoughts on this episode of Handmaid's Tale. Let me know what you thought in the comments below of the episode. Like and subscribe is super important on YouTube. It is the simple way that we get to grow our audience on YouTube, so please do hit those buttons and the bell as well if you want the notifications. You can, of course, support us financially over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV for as little as $1 per month and keep all the content coming. So thank you very much once again for watching or listening. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any milk?